taking out one deer is probably better for the forest than, however many hours of pulling invasives you can do in a year, You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. This is Billy Brown.
And Tony Crosdale.
Before we get started, we should remind you that if you like the podcast, please like us on your listening app of choice and recommend us to your friends. And please, of course, tune in to all the wonderful Wildlife Observer Network podcasts. Anything new coming up in that arena to tell people about?
No, not. I'm sure there'll be more of Tyke's, labor stuff coming out. His struggles organizing an Autobahn. I'm sure that's going to be more developments with that. The president resigned, so we got to kind of do a debriefing on that.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's that. I'm sure that'll come up but yeah, also apologize. I forgot our recorder, and then Billy and I couldn't get our old recorder working, so we're using a phone. So apologize for the quality.
And so we're going to have this is going to be a slightly different kind of episode. Last time we were doing the kind of thing we often do, which is we get an expert on something urban wildlife. In that case, it was someone who came to us with a great idea to talk about urban adapting juncos, which are a small songbird in Los Angeles. And that was sort of like, how we like to introduce people to urban wildlife phenomena from around the world. But in this case, this is more of, I don't know, call it a philosophical kind of discussion, where I'll do a little intro into my background to make this make sense maybe. But the background is that I have been a vegetarian since I was 18, and leaning ever more vegan probably since then. And the reason for this is pretty basic. I think when I was a teenager, I sort of got to thinking about how much do I really want to kill this thing to eat it? And I just came up with my own form of, if you're looking up different philosophies, what's a utilitarian philosophical perspective on this, which is I just said, I don't think that the pleasure I get from eating something that comes from a dead animal versus eating something that doesn't, I don't think that pleasure is enough to counterbalance from the animal's perspective, it's death. And so that was sort of my gateway to stop eating things that came from dead animals. And then over time, I sort of realized that the systems that produce eggs and milk are very closely intertwined with the systems that produce dead animals. So if you're drinking milk, that meant that, there's maybe a male calf in the system that got turned into veal because of to be able to produce the milk, and that when they get up to the end of their lives, the cows get turned into McDonald's hamburgers, and so I said, okay, I'm sort of drifting away from that. And also there's the environmental considerations that, generally speaking, almost all the time, eating plant-based foods has a lower footprint than in our agricultural system eating animal-based foods. And I'm not going to get into the whole long reasons for that. I actually had a project for years, from 2007 to 2012, called the PB&J campaign, where I was trying to encourage people to focus on the meal rather than just going vegetarian or something like that. Just focus on the meal and eat something lower on the food chain. So I come into this discussion that we're about to have with most of my life, I'm 44 now, so most of my life having not eaten dead animals and avoided killing them whenever I really can. So I'm someone who I still have one pet snake, but my thing, if you knew me growing up, I was the kid with the snakes. And so that, of course, involves killing lots of animals to feed to the animals that I kept as pets. And so I actually have a lot of more experience than most people in killing lots of things with my hands, which is kind of an awful thing to say. But these days, I buy my mice frozen and defrost them. But even there, I'm still involved. I want to be clear. I'm involved with killing things to support a lifestyle choice, essentially, to feed a snake. Tony, you make the great point sometimes that we shouldn't pat people on the back too much. You talk about with cats, for doing a great thing for animals. I'm using air quotes there because as you say, usually.
Yeah, you pay someone to grind up animals and feed them to this one. So you've chosen to save one animal. You rescued, quote unquote, one animal, but to keep that alive, you're killing all these other animals.
Yeah, that's as true for my rescued rat snake as it is for a cat. And it's and so I want to come into this discussion saying that like that I've already make decisions to kill things for various reasons. You know, when we have a mouse infestation in our kitchen. Like, yeah, I do what we can to close up the food containers and stuff so the mice don't have as much food, but I also put out traps and we kill the mice. I know that also if I did a have a heart thing, the thing would just die slowly somewhere else. And so, but this goes back to actually a conversation I was having with the guy we had on the podcast maybe a couple years ago, Brad Gates.
Yeah, my neighbor.
Tony's neighbor.
I've literally seen him in his driveway practicing shooting. And also like... He invited me to his house a few weeks ago to see a full-size bighorn sheep mount in his living room.
Yeah.
And this is Philadelphia. Like, he lives in a twin, so it's a little bit bigger than the average Philadelphia home, but still a very modest home by most standards. And
yes.
He has a full-size bighorn sheep in his living room.
And has a bow and arrow range in his driveway.
Well, just a target. I'm trying to convince my wife to let me do it in our yard. I think I'm on the fence.
I'd come over.
Yeah.
And so, any case, talking to Brad, we're talking about deer hunting in urban settings, and he made a comment where he said, "Yeah, I've done my part to," and I can't remember if this was for an article I wrote or for the podcast, but he made a comment that I have done my part to control the Philly deer herd this year. He took out I think 7 does in 1 year, and he gave away the meat mostly to people who he knew who were hard up for money, and helped them with their food budgets essentially. And we're sitting here in a park, and I'll ask you, like, what is your perception of what's the deer herd situation right now in this urban creek corridor park that we're sitting in?
There's definitely an overpopulation, and that's even with a management strategy here. But yeah, you can.
You just use a euphemism right there. That means. Does that mean the park does culling?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
But there's you can still see like the browse line in most places, So and I was visited some colleagues working up in a deer closure in another part of the park, and like I got there in like early May and to see the amount of spring ephemerals that I could see in the deer closure compared to outside it was just very clear, very apparent. So,
and you see it when you're also just the saplings coming up.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's something that we're talking about the browse line, and this is stuff that has like decades of impact on a forest. Where like, if the deer are for decades eating every tree sapling before it can turn into a tree, then you have this weird, like, age class like pause in your tree canopy.
They don't have. It's just clear. It's very obvious. Like the problem. They don't have. They don't coexist with predators like they used to, and they have sources of food outside of the forest that they can exploit to increase their population, but then they still exert more pressure on the forest than can handle,
Right.
So they can supplement their, even if they get even if they've, made the forest, like they don't die from starvation in the forest because then they can leave the forest and eat else on people's lawns,
right,
and cemeteries and things like that, and highway medians.
Or they can sit here. I'm looking at mowed grass between us and the creek, and there they've got however many clover. They've got all kinds of juicy leafy forbs that white-tailed deer like to munch on.
And then they can and then they can still hammer and they don't just like eat the saplings. The bucks will rub them raw for their velvet, get rid of their velvet in the fall. So, it's we have a similar problem with beaver because they're coming back, but the forests aren't. They have plenty of aquatic habitat, but the forests are narrow, and so they chew our plantings to nubs. It's the same kind of thing where you have like two habitats, right? You have like the forest, and then you have like the manicured areas and the lawns and whatnot. So the deer just expand. The same with the beavers; they have the aquatic system, but then they have this too narrow a forest. So it is, you have to make management decisions that involve the lives of animals. In the case of the beaver, they were relocated, but the deer, where are you going to relocate the deer to? Like there's just nowhere.
Everywhere's already full of deer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it gets more challenging as you get further out, even further out of the city, where you've got, like, if you're driving around, let's say, central New Jersey, or you're driving around, like, the more suburban suburbs of Philadelphia, like, you can, if you're near a green space, you go out at night, you just see, like, almost herds of deer. Well, they're herds of deer, like, browsing. And so then I got to thinking, like, well, should I start hunting? And then, I don't know. Sorry, this is it's promoted, and it's prompted like this multi-month, like combination of with me, like I start obsessing about some topic and I research the hell out of it. So there's that part of it, and then there's sort of the question of like, this is like a collision between two, like almost two ethical systems. Like it's the question of does my personal decision not to kill things, like how would that conflict with my very strong personal chosen path of trying to promote good decisions for habitats around where I live? I mean, I'll go out there and I'll trim bittersweet and cut down, tree of heaven. I'll do all kinds of we'll call it management practices for plants. Should I do something similar for deer, or how does that mesh with other ways I've chosen to live my life?
I'd like to look at the numbers, but I would imagine that taking out a deer would
has negligible impact.
No.
Oh.
I would say taking out one deer is probably better for the forest than, however many hours of pulling invasives you can do in a year,
Because the deer are also involved with promoting the invasives by eating everything else.
Yeah.
And then, like, in Philadelphia, essentially, because there's so many deer, it's complicated how the state breaks up its jurisdictions for overseeing wildlife. But basically, like, in the Philly area, there's almost no limit to the number of does that you can kill in a season, except for practical limits.
Yeah, you have to get permits. You have to get a tag. You can't just go out with impunity.
It's like $6.50 a tag. It's not that much money.
Yeah.
Like you can if you can pay $6.50 over and over again, you can hunt does.
Yeah, but keep in mind
to
that
heart's content.
There's not as many places to hunt.
And that is like
yeah. So in the surrounding counties, there's more places to hunt, and then you go further than that, there's an extreme amount of areas to hunt. So like if you want to get a doe tag, generally what you do is you apply for it for a few different counties, and hopefully you get one of them. But it's very easy to get the doe tags for the counties around Philly, and especially in Philly, because there's not enough places to hunt, so therefore not enough hunting to actually use up the amount of doe tags allotted.
Yeah, and so that's a whole practical challenge. Is in Philadelphia you have to find private land where you would be permitted to hunt.
Yeah,
and then there are also restrictions where you have to hunt at least. I forget with bow, because also you can't use a gun in Philadelphia.
You can in certain places.
In Philadelphia?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
I believe you can on private land. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll respectfully say that I think when I read the digest the last time, it's only bow hunting, but it's a hard thing to do. It's.
I think it's set. It's almost, the laws are such the distance that it's pretty much impossible.
Right. That's what we're getting at. There's a safety zone. Yeah.
But like there's duck hunters that hunt ducks with shotguns in Philly limits. And I asked the game warden about it, and I thought that was illegal. He's like, no, the law the law says you can't illegally discharge a firearm in Philadelphia, but I think there's there's guys that hunt like ducks on the Delaware River legally in Philadelphia.
Oh.
So I think there is but you can't. There's no. I don't think there's a place where you could shoot a.
I got to meet some of those guys.
Yeah,
that is interesting. So yeah, I'm trying to decide what to do. My wife Gigi has said, like, yeah, if you want to do it, go ahead. She is someone who is, I would say, is not strictly vegetarian, sort of vegetarian leaning on her own and vegetarian friendly, so that as a family we eat vegetarian, but like, and doesn't like red meat, so she probably wouldn't eat venison if I shot a deer, but wouldn't have any like ethical problem with it. And then the challenge is my daughter, who's 9, and I've raised her with this way of looking at the world and looking at how we relate to animals. And 9-year-olds don't always have flexible moral systems.
yeah.
And she more than others. And I don't want to like bully her through this, so that's like a whole other question. That's mine to deal with as a family.
You got me hungry, man. I love venison.
See, I this is the harder thing. I was talking to another friend of mine about this, in that I would have an easier time killing deer than eating them. It's like again, like, I don't enjoy killing animals, but like when you keep snakes for most of your life, like it's something that you just do, and you and it's not an alien activity, whereas like I don't know what I would like.
I've never killed a deer, right? I've killed pheasants and plenty of fish, but I've never actually killed a deer.
I've killed fish. That was when I was a kid.
I've had the last time I went hunting, I only had a buck. You get your one antler tag. Because technically, sometimes females have antlers. Very rarely, but they do. Huh. It's like, hormonal thing or whatever. For the evidence that when like idiots say that, sex is binary. It's you're like, not really, because some female deer have antlers. Like there's like a whole there is absolutely a spectrum. But anyway, so but you have to I believe it's 3 tines on one side, right? And so this deer,
because they want you to kill. They don't want they want to let the deer, the bucks, grow big enough to have big racks before they get killed. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was in my stand, and a buck walked out, and
this is way upstate. This is like
up in the Poconos, and really cool spot. This like dogwood like swamp. So if you get a deer, often you have to wear like waders to go get it, because it's pretty nasty. But anyway, its antlers are very tall, so it just usually when antlers are that tall, they will have 3 tines. So I saw it, and it was a perfect shot, and I got my lifted my rifle, and I was saying to myself, I was like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm actually. There's no way I would have missed. I was like, I can't believe I'm actually going to kill a deer right now. And then I put my my scope on and counted the tines, and it was only 2 on each side, and I didn't pull the obviously I didn't pull the trigger, and I was like wow, like it was this weird thought, like, man, this is actually going to happen. I'm actually about to kill a deer.
Yeah.
But I don't go frequently enough. Like, I'm hoping to go with Brad or other people this year. I should apply for my tags soon. It's just I have a kid, and I like bird watching. I like other activities, and it just
there's only time for so much.
Yeah. But I mean, but I've growing up hunting with my dad, and between what my dad would get, he usually got a deer a year, and then what his friends would share. I've had venison probably more years of my life than not. Especially as a kid, and it's delicious. It really is, and it has I don't know if they call it a gamey taste. There is a taste to it that I really enjoy, and even if you make like lentil soup or something, with the ground beef or whatever, or sausage, it's just it really lends a wonderful flavor to it, and it's very enjoyable. And I hope to get back into it and get some. It's just, again, it's more of a time issue than anything else.
So but you've hunted pheasants, but not waterfowl.
No, I have an issue. Here's my thing: is like a pheasant is roughly chicken sized. I mean, chicken is basically a type of pheasant.
Yeah.
Right.
Galliforms.
Yeah, and so you get a few meals out of a pheasant, and like And geese. Here's my issue with geese is that you get plenty of meals out of a goose, but
Yeah.
I know it sounds horrible to anthropomorphize, but they mate for life. So the idea that like I would shoot someone's
You're
mate,
widowing a goose.
it just seems so cruel. And I really like geese, and then ducks. Like I go out and I enjoy looking at ducks, and so the idea of killing a duck, and you don't get unless you shoot like a mallard, which is so we're kind of biased in our views because the most common duck is a mallard, and they're huge. They're an enormous duck. Most ducks are not even half.
You made the
weight.
same comment about geese too.
Canada geese are like an expressly big goose. Yeah, I mean a snow goose is still a big bird. Don't get me wrong, but
a giant Canada goose, which is the subspecies we have resident around here.
Yeah, they're immense.
Yeah.
You know, which is crazy when you think about swans that are even bigger. But like,
Now that's something.
I'd shoot the hell out of a mute swan in a heartbeat.
So mute swans are European or Eurasian that are introduced and tear up marshes in the mid-Atlantic.
And they're so territorial that they'll prevent other waterfowl from nesting.
Yeah.
I found that out in Alaska when I was searching for duck nests, and we found this juicy-looking bog, and we figured it would be a treasure trove, and there was a trumpeter swan pair there, and there was no other duck nests. There's no waterfowl nests in the whole bog. I think we found one shoveler nest. That was it. And like it would have, we got dropped off in the boat, and and can't really get too far, as you can imagine. You can't like basically the area that we could search in the time we had allotted by foot to get to was barren of any other waterfowl because the swans are so territorial.
Huh.
So mute swans are most of our swans. They breed. The tundra swans and the trumpeter swans. They breed in immense areas of wilderness where there's plenty of other places for the waterfowl to nest, we're out of the range of these aggressive swans. But when mute swans are feral, then the small wetlands that we have left, they can completely, chase out all the native,
and really rip up a whole lot of vegetation while they're at it.
Yeah.
That's in a way that would be the easiest place to start.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's legal. I don't know what the mute
It's
swans.
legal. So this stuff I happen to be researching a lot lately. So in New Jersey it's not. You can't shoot swans in New Jersey. In Delaware, I think you can shoot them during regular waterfowl seasons.
Mute swans?
Mute swans.
Okay.
And then in PA, there's even when you look at the hunting digest, there's a special little insert square on the page where it's they say mute swans are not native and you can hunt them, you can shoot them. And so I'm curious to talk to the game warden we know who we're buddies with to see whether that means that's only within waterfowl seasons or you can go out tomorrow during the middle of the summer and shoot some mute swans. But again, access is again a big challenge. It's I can think of a ton of mute swans that are in city parks where you're not allowed to shoot anything.
Well, that's the problem, right? We're again, back to the deer, we're where you have access to hunt something is often the place where you need it the least, right?
Yeah.
Because it's big area enough to hunt,
So
so an area, a big marsh, where you could have enough safely hunt. You might not, if there are mute swans there, that might not really be affecting things too much because there's this big enough area.
Yeah.
So, back to what I would hunt and whatnot. So ducks, I just find it because you tend to just breast them, and anyway, there's not much other meat other than the breast, and you might not even get a whole meal, out of.
You shoot a teal, it doesn't amount to very much.
No,
Yeah.
and most ducks, are that, and so it just kind of seems. But the thing is with ducks is because of the mortality on the breeding grounds, there's actually way more males than females. So you can probably shoot as many male ducks as you want, and you're really not going to affect the population.
So then, do you think there's a conservation logic for shooting resident Canada geese? I know they're a pain in the ass for people, but are they a pain in the ass in manicured areas, or are they also? Because I know that when people plant wetland plantings, you got to really shield them from geese ripping them out. Are they?
I would think so, because they also. It's hard to find an area where they're. Think about a Canada goose, right? They're feeding in manicured areas, but they're spending the night on water somewhere, right? So even if they're, and they defecate all this fed, I think
they're messing with the nutrient balance in the waterways,
and they make waterways eutrophic, these ponds and stuff. And I heard that I don't know if it's true. I heard that a Canada goose can poop as much as a human in a day, and a bird that weighs 10 pounds, 15 pounds, because they're just there's so little nutrients in grass that they got to eat so much of it that goes through, and
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's true, but I mean, if you ever go anywhere, there's lots of geese. There's lots of geese poop.
That's for sure.
I told you about the time one of the funniest things I've ever done. I was riding my bike.
Saying something.
I was riding my bike by the art museum on the path, and which is known for having just crazy numbers of geese.
Yeah.
And there was these joggers were like, this couple was like stopped because there was a very aggressive hissing goose.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And I was just riding my bike, and as I like rode around this goose, I just went, "What up, geese?" and this couple just lost their minds. Like, I don't think I've ever gotten I think they were just like so tense, not knowing what to do with this goose, and this knucklehead just like bombs past them on a bike and just says, "What up, geese?" and they just lost it. It was so funny.
That's up there with you touching the woodchuck.
Oh yeah,
which is a story you have to listen to previous episodes to hear.
Yeah.
But in any case, So I don't.
Well, I just real quick. I just want to finish what I would shoot.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to get into it, but I would shoot the hell out of a turkey.
Really?
A gobbler?
They're not a. Well, you could. Again, you and I are facing this from different directions. Like I would say, to get over my the reason that I don't kill things, I sort of need a conservation logic to do it.
Right. Okay. I don't necessarily. Right? But I certainly feel bad about certain things, and I wouldn't. I wouldn't have never. I know that coyotes can be overpopulated, but I've never shoot a coyote, even though there might be logic for it. There's certain things that I wouldn't do because of I hate to say it.
They're awesome animals.
Yeah, if gorillas were if gorillas were overpopulated, I still wouldn't shoot a gorilla or whales because I kind of feel like they're So it is completely I'm making these weird judgment calls, but I don't and also when you shoot an animal where there's a dominant male you get the other males get to get laid that year, so you get to
You're
stop
helping a gobbler out.
Yeah, you get to stop some cock blocking. You get a little Jake, gets some that year, But I totally get the motivation to want to hunt. Via I don't know about you, but I was when I spent almost 20 years being vegetarian or vegan, and
straight edge or
yeah,
damn.
I mean, straight edge was because I just don't want to be a junkie. I didn't realize that you could do it in moderation. When I got into punk in my teens, people only a few years younger than me were just they look like zombies. So I didn't really see. I was straight edge, not because I heard you said today and Gorilla Biscuits was I'm gonna be a straight edge. It was more I was I listened to Conflict and Exploited and Crash and all those bands, and the other people who like that stuff would look they're 27 and look like they were living dead. So I was okay, I don't want to be this. So that's why I was straight. And then I know there's a whole vegan straight edge scene, but I wasn't really part of that because I liked a different kind of punk. That was what a lot of vegans in that scene, but not straight edge. But it was so made the point. It takes 10 pounds of grain and 1 pound of beef, whatever. And I wanted to do it. It wasn't so much for environmental for animal rights reasons as it was environmental. But when I started working at field work and and having enough money to buy meat at Whole Foods, whatever. Yeah, I will eat a cheesesteak maybe once a month. And I don't know where that meat. Obviously that meat didn't come from the greatest source.
It's not that often.
Yeah, but I mostly eat good quality meat from Whole Foods or whatever, right? And I still eat a whole lot of vegetables and whatnot. But I get the motive, but when you hunt, the environmental reasons to not eat meat go away.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. It's because you're even and this is something that I tiptoe into cautiously because it's a line that I think unfairly is used to beat up vegetarians, where that no matter how you're farming, you're killing stuff. You're killing animals at least by accident. And and people will say it's oh, see, there's no point to being vegetarian. And I think no. I think even if you're eating vegetarian, you're shrinking your footprint to a point relative to eating farmed meat that you're still minimizing your impact in terms of dead animals. But if what you're doing is if the choice is between I don't know, like 100-pound doe, 120-pound doe that you don't have to farm anything for.
30, 40 pounds of meat out of it,
Yeah, and then that is all farmed land foregone, right? And it's like and it's in a way you're supporting the kind of land I would rather have, which is forested land or like meadowland or whatever, marshland versus like, where I grew up, I grew up in central Ohio, where like you get outside of Columbus and it's like nothing but corn and soy fields. It is it is green, but in a real sense it is an incredibly barren landscape. And I don't know, this is the stuff that I'm wrestling with. And we should touch on at least something that I know that if people are going to send us comments, it would be about this, which is that there are non-lethal control methods for a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. People talk about like, putting, killing the eggs of Canada geese so they don't reproduce successfully, or trying to use birth control on deer. My understanding of it, from when I've looked into this and talked to people who do the management of land and parks, my understanding of it is that they're incredibly difficult and expensive to get to work, and might only work under limited circumstances. I mean, where you can really control the inflow and outflow of animals.
Yeah, we you've heard us beat the drum about TNR, the trap, neuter, release fallacy, and like it's just generally these non-lethal methods, just don't work, and that's one thing. Even if they do want,
it takes an incredible amount of effort.
Yeah, like it just doesn't, And I'm sorry, but like, all of us shouldn't be like putting out like. How do you know that you're only getting deer? What are you going to do? Like, like you dart them and like, or like you put out like bait, but how do you not sterilize, raccoons and foxes and everything?
Well, like, and also just that in go back to TNR, which is essentially what we're talking about. Like, birth control is a population control method. Is that like when you look at TNR, like you've got to but like that you have to have a really relatively high rate of hitting the animals to have an impact on the population size. And so like you would have to, like TNR, it's like 75-90% of female cats that you have to have neutered. And then if you're looking at those kind of rates on something like deer, maybe they're not quite as fecund as cats, but like you have to get a huge portion of the population, and it is a lot more expensive than if you can get people to go ahead and shoot them with guns or bows and arrows to eat them. And when you're looking at the limited resources that public agencies have to do land management, that matters.
And I was listening to something related. My friends Kate and Tom, who used to live in Montana, live in Colorado, they gave it, live in Portland. Why did I say Colorado? Anyway, they told me that they loved our podcast because it was like one of the only wildlife podcasts out there, and of course, after there are more now since the pandemic, but they said that
they all suck. No, there's some really good ones.
Yes, obviously. Yeah. And I did the crossover with one recently, Naturally Adventurous, which is my favorite podcast that we don't do. But anyway, so they were telling me that they would listen to the Meat Eater podcast by Steve Rinella, because even though it's a hunting podcast, they talked a lot about other things, and I subscribe to it. I don't listen to it always, but it's quite good. And I listened to an episode about the red wolf, and they were talking about and so they had to they reintroduced into this area of North Carolina, on that peninsula, like with the Almar. I forget something with an A peninsula, and the reason why they chose it was the coyotes weren't there yet, but then the coyotes started getting closer, and so what they do is they would, on the edges of the habitat, the edges of the wolf range, they would sterilize coyotes, and basically the whole thing, whole thing about trap, neuter, release is the cats are there, but even though you don't, and they hear cat people say, well, it's the vacuum effect. If you remove the cats entirely, more will come in, and so, and this is I think what they're saying was like,
which is a fallacy in urban settings, because what's really pulling them in is the fact that you're putting food out for them.
Right, but they're saying that in this case was that
this is where it actually might apply,
but it still didn't work. And for a while it did, but they just could not maintain the sterilization rates, as we're saying, Like, even though it did it did hold these coyote populations at bay for a while, in the sterile, like they just couldn't keep. Eventually those coyotes will die, and they'll have to sterilize more of them because other ones will come in. So they just had to keep it up, and and this is one area with the federal government behind them, and they couldn't do it. And also they just couldn't. So that's
because the concern is that the coyotes would breed with the red wolves and dilute the population.
Yeah,
or so you sort of lose.
Yeah, and the thing is if there's enough red wolves, they're not. They keep the coyotes out. But once you lower the numbers enough, they'll start breeding, right? And then the other problem is people started killing them, and so they were holding on for a while. They started to flourish, but then the people started killing them. The numbers dropped, and they also couldn't keep the coyotes out.
Well, that's a sad situation.
And they start breeding.
Well,
but this is the thing. Is the point is that the sterilization is extremely difficult and requires an insane amount of manpower to do, and so it just it just really doesn't work, and in this case you're like, well, why don't they just kill the coyotes? I think then there's just so many of them, and when you have an entire continent full of coyotes wanting to move into this peninsula, you can't kill enough either.
And I've been there. I mean, I've gone herping in that part of North Carolina. It is not easy terrain to get through. It is like. It's a ton of marsh.
And the Pocosins, which is
yes, it's like the special kind of soggy, flooded, meadowy, heath kind of habitat.
It's super thick. I always think of a Pocosin as a super thick forest of cypress and sweet gum and catbrier and stuff, where it's just this wall of vegetation.
It is. You can't get through it. Yeah.
It's like Swaits' Warbler Factory, but you can never see them. I've only heard them because they're it's so thick.
Yeah, down there's these lovely pygmy rattlesnakes that come in this kind of pink color that people go to find. Yeah.
Hyde County, yeah. Hyde and Dare County. It's a legendary spot.
Yeah.
I love North Carolina. I'd move there in a heartbeat.
But in any case, we're gonna wrap up. I think this has not come to any conclusions. I'll cite just to close my favorite scene in the movie Old School. Do you remember that movie?
Oh. So good.
And it's
my boy Blue.
So my favorite scene of the movie is Vince Vaughn. They're having this. It's a dumb movie with some funny, which can be funny. But it's the idea is that there's these guys who are kind of one of them's going back to college, and they decide to set up a fraternity, even though they're all way older than the college students. And so there's a scene where Vince Vaughn's character is ends up in a bedroom at the fraternity with this girl, and and it's all of a sudden, he just stops, and he's like, I can't, I'm married. And, it's what? And then she looks at him what? And he's like, I can't. And then, for me, it was, funny, and it sort of stands in for all these times in your life when you're, you think you might do something that's outside of your patterns or, the way you've chosen to live your life. Could you actually do it if you got to that point? Would I be like Tony in a blind or, up in a tree with a crossbow in my hand looking at a doe in some corner of Philadelphia and just not be able to pull the trigger?
Yeah.
Or the same thing with Canada geese landing in some decoys. But or do I even get to that point? Does my daughter put up a strong enough fight that I decide it's not worth pushing? But we'll find out. So we'll see if I can drum up some more discussions about urban hunting, because I find it fascinating for so many reasons. It's sort of about how we interact with wildlife in urban settings. I think if you like this episode, please like us on your podcast listening app of choice. Please share it with your friends and tell everybody about it. You can find us on email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. If you have ideas for other episodes, please let us know. We'd love to get ideas sourced that way and hear from you about either research you're doing or wildlife topics that you know a lot about wherever you live in urban settings. And of course, listen to all the Wildlife Observer Network podcasts. We got a bunch of them. Tony, anything you want to wrap up with?
Everybody, just now, I hope you're all vaccinated and hope you're enjoying nature safely. And we'll see you soon.
And wear pants if you're in a tick area.
Don't raw dog the woods.
It's going to be Tony's new song. Stay tuned. All right, take care.